Yeah, so we have the Burnetts in Victoria, and where are you, Ross?
Hauser.
Okay.
Hauser, Vancouver Island.
There.
Also in British Columbia, we have the Mays in Salmon Arm. We have the Naess family in Chicago.
We're split apart.
And Parry Sound. And then Emma and I are here also in Parry Sound. So. All right, so those who are just joining, as I've mentioned to others who have been on, we're gonna have a fun virtual quiz. So if you want to participate, you can pull out your cell phone or add an extra window to your browser at menti.com, and there's a code there, 496518. We're gonna have a fun little sort of trivia questions as we go through this Let's Talk Orienteering speaker series. And I think we'll probably get started relatively soon. I think it's probably a good idea. How many do we have on here now?
Hey, Mike, can you put the code and maybe the link to Menti in the chat?
Yeah, it's in the top of the chat, but maybe we can just put it in again. Yeah.
There you go.
They probably might not be able to see it if it was before they came in.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's menti.com and the code is 496518.
I'm logging in.
You can participate, yeah.
I don't even know the answers to these.
Yeah, I don't either. Actually,
The answers are on you.
All right, so shall we, I think we should get started. Hi everyone, my name is Mike Waddington. I'm gonna sort of moderate today's, what we hope is the first of many generations edition, if you will, of the Let's Talk Orienteering Canada speaker series. And today's generation is gonna focus on some parent-child national team links. Of course, orienteering is an awesome family sport, and we have many Canadian orienteering families such as the James, Smiths, Grahams, Kemps, many, many more. And so today we're going to feature the Burnetts, Mays, Naess family, and here myself and Emma with the Waddingtons. We're going to kick off with a few quick introductions. I'm going to ask each of the families to briefly introduce themselves, and then we're going to move over to the menti.com trivia, but virtual quiz, if you will. So let's just start off with, we'll go alphabetical. We'll start with the Burnetts, then we'll go the Mays, Naess, and finish off with the Waddingtons. So Ross and Kerstin.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So I started orienteering about 1976 when I was a student in Vancouver. My first orienteering event was actually a snowshoe score orienteering on Hollyburn Mountain. And one of the problems I ran into was that since my first event was score, I didn't know there was any other type. So the first point-to-point orienteering I went to, I kind of did backwards because it looked more logical to go to number 13 first instead of number 1. Yeah, I've been orienteering since then and attended lots of World Cups. Sorry, was someone saying something? I thought I heard.
Nope, all you.
How much detail would you like to know, or is that enough to start with?
That's great.
Okay. How about you, Kerstin?
I'm Kerstin. I'm Ross's daughter. I'm currently living in Victoria, BC, where I've been for the past 6 years or so. But I grew up in Whitehorse, Yukon, and that's where I learned to orienteer, which is quite a treat because anyone who's been there will know the terrain there is beautiful. And I've been told I've been orienteering since I was 2 weeks old. I don't personally remember it.
Carried around on her mother's chest.
Awesome. Let's go to Salmon Arm, to the Mays.
So I'm Brian. I've been orienteering since about the mid-'80s. Grew up as a youngster orienteering in Newfoundland. Yeah, enjoyed that. Went to some SAS Peepery camps. Got lots of great coaching by people like Mike Waddington and Oivind on the call. I was fortunate enough to go to jaywalk a couple of times, World Junior Championships, and then World Orienteering Championships, Senior Champs 5 times. So enjoyed going to COCs and NAOCs and lots of orienteering all across North America and elsewhere in the world.
I'm Rachel, and similarly to Kerstin, I've been orienteering since I was really small, started being carrying around, and then doing the spring course, which I don't know if they have that anymore, but that was fun. So then I did that a lot growing up, but I would say sort of through like middle school and high school, I was a little less focused on orienteering and did more cross-country skiing, but then got back into orienteering and attended jaywalk in Hungary and then in Denmark last year.
Yes, family.
Papa, you are muted.
All right, it's Oivind, and I'm in Chicago, just outside of Chicago in Illinois, and we've been here for the last 14 years or so. But I grew up in Nova Scotia and started orienteering when I was about 6, back in '74, and I think I did my first orienteering meet, as I understand it, when by myself when I was around 8, and did it pretty much nonstop from that point until I finished university, and then I'd say it was a bit of an early retirement, but I was around 24, but I had a great time orienteering, and have gotten back into it in the last 10 or so years here in Chicago. So hand it over to Jan Erik.
Hi, my name is Jan Erik. I'm my dad's oldest son. I have 2 younger brothers, and I got into orienteering. I've been doing it on and off, I think, most of my life, but I had refused to enjoy it until around the COCs in Whistler, which was in 2014. And then the following years after that, I went to jaywalk in Norway and then Switzerland and Finland, and finished it off with Hungary. And last year went to my first World Championships, and since then I've been going to school at the U of C in Calgary, and I'm doing a little bit of coaching with the HVP and the team there, so FLOC. Yeah, that's what I've been up to.
I'm Mike, and I've been orienteering since the late 70s or so. Introduced to the sport, my father was some good friends with some Norwegians, and they had come to Hamilton, where I'm from. And then when I was 11, we lived in Norway for a year, and I was doing a lot of orienteering and cross-country skiing here in Canada. So living in Norway was great, and went to a few, I guess we'll call them jaywalks. They weren't called jaywalk back then with Oivind. That's the picture behind him. Hard to believe we're only 1 year apart. I grew taller, he lost his hair. But then I ran in a few world champs, and still enjoy orienteering today, although not racing so much.
I'm Emma. I have been orienteering since, well, kind of like what Rachel said, been forced to it as a baby, not really remembering it, as Kerstin said that as well. I really started orienteering in 2006 when my family lived in Sweden for a few months. I think my first COCs were that following summer. And then I got back into it when we Don't Get Lost started our Adventure Running Kids program. And following that, I became a member of the HBP in 2015 and went to the same jaywalks that Jan Erik went to, but I also went to walk those years as well. So been orienteering for elite level for about 5 years now. So we're going to start our Menti meter. So if you guys can go to menti.com and put in the code 496518. We will share our screen here. And just a reminder, if you are not sharing your screen or your video, if you could please mute your microphone. We're getting a little bit of feedback.
Okay, so yeah, so you can join the quiz. Please All right. We need someone to turn on, mute themselves if possible.
Yeah, but, and they've got yellow circles on them.
Oh, should I also mute myself?
Maybe it's your end. I don't know.
Uh,
All right. So
everyone?
we are going to start the quiz. And this is just a way to sort of facilitate sort of some more fun discussion. The faster you respond and get the right answer, the more points you get. There's no awards at the end, but just bragging rights. Let's start off with this question here. It'll come up on your. Which families has the fewest years between their parents' last walk and their child's first walk? Burnett's, Mays, Naess, or Waddington's?
Yes, so the correct answer is the Mays. So Brian ran his last walk in 2015 and Rachel ran her first in 2018. Okay. Now we'll go to the opposite end of the spectrum. Oh, we missed a question.
I missed a question. Oh, well.
That's okay.
Has any child competed in the same or more walks than their parent? Yes or no?
Ooh, we got a yes.
We got a lot of smart people. Yeah. So Emma and myself have both run 4 walks. I think Emma has a better chance of outnumbering me in her career. I mean, I could try to do a Brian May and win an automatic spot at winning a North American when I'm getting a little older, but I don't think that's going to happen. But that might be a good opportunity to sort of move on to that a question for Brian. Brian's our only athlete on our panel who's sort of raced in a modern day walk and an old school walk. And so for Brian, can you tell us about how it's changed for better or for worse, or why?
Well, I mean, there's been a number of changes. So we have now sprint, middle, and long, which is sort of an evolution. Back when I first ran walk in '93, there was a short distance, but that sort of split into sprint and middle. So and long and relay, of course, has been around for a long time. There's been certainly technological changes, electronic punching, GPS tracking, TV coverage with lots of arena production. So I think that's certainly come a long way. And I would say a lot of that is great, being able to follow runners in the forest and know where they're going, and the ones that are having a great day, finding all the controls, and those poor souls who are circling around with their tails making a map that looks like a bowl of spaghetti. That's not so great, but it's fun to watch, really fun to watch. So, of course, there's lots of new people in the sport, but I certainly enjoy the fact that in this sport, we see the same people year after year. I was in Denmark last year and got to race against some of the same people I had raced against at Jaywalk in 1990. So, yeah, lots of new people, but lots of old people that you see year after year after year.
Now, Brian's last walk was in Scotland in 2015, and you were there to watch it, Rachel. So how did that influence your decision to go to Jaywalk? I think in making the team in 2018, I believe.
I don't think I would say that watching the races specifically had a huge impact. There was definitely a lot of impact from just growing up orienteering and being involved in the sport. I always enjoyed it, other than when, you have a bad race and hate it for a while until you go out and do it again and it's really fun. But it just wasn't as much of like a focus in what I was doing. I think probably a more influential factor was when we went to watch that walk in Scotland. We also went to Orienteering and did the spectator races at Jaywalk that year in Norway. And I think that sort of exposure to the racing was something that really made me want to race on that sort of level again, more so than watching the race itself.
Awesome. Now, unfortunately, one of our questions got cut off, and it was the family that had the most years between international, and that was the Naess family. Oivind's last international race was walk in '89, and Erik ran Jaywalk in 2015. Okay, so here's our leaderboard at the moment, and it's pretty tight. Looks like Andrew ahead of Marsh. And look, Jan Erik's participating there. I think that must be him. Doing well, Jan Erik. That's great. All right, next question. We've got three more.
Inside knowledge.
Yeah. Has a Burnett, May, Naess, and Waddington been on the same walk or jaywalk team at the same time? Yes or no?
Ooh.
No, the answer is no. I think Oivind, Ross, and I were together in '89. I think that's but I don't think we ever had we didn't have all four at the same one. Okay, let's move on to the next question. This is a fun one. How many of our athletes here have been on the front cover of the Swedish Orienteering Federation's Skogsport magazine? It's sort of like the equivalent of being on the front of Rolling Stone for rock stars, maybe. The answer is 1, 2, or 3, or none. Oh, I'm kind of curious who that correct answer, number one. Yeah, this is kind of an odd one. You remember that, Ross?
Yeah, that was a funny photo.
Yeah, it was
That's the one that
Ross
had
Oivind. They won a bunch of gold medals, but they decided to put Team Canada at the opening ceremonies on for some strange reason. Okay, and here's our last question.
Click it.
So how many people of our athletes here today have lived in Scandinavia? Oh, I got a lot of right there. Number 6 is the right answer. That's 6 out of 8, which is a high number. So it's going to see who the winner is here. It looks like Andrew.
Oh, David punches into the lead.
I think that's I don't know if that's David Backer, but congratulations on who that is. And it's going to stop that for now. But that's a good way to segue into the importance of Scandinavia. So let's go into Oivind and Jan Erik right now. You both have spent time living in Norway. Actually, Oivind was born in Norway, but until you lived in Norway, I think I knew more Norwegian than you did. But can you just tell people?
Probably still do.
Yeah, maybe. Tell people a little bit about living in Norway and how that influenced your orienteering, both of you.
Yeah, I'll start kind of back to what Rachel said. For me, it wasn't.
Mike.
There's feedback coming from somewhere?
Yeah, I think we lost Jan Erik, but why don't you keep chatting and hopefully we'll get him back.
So I was just going to say, similar to Rachel, the most impactful thing for me, and I've said this for everybody who gets kids involved in the sport, is the opportunity to go over to Scandinavia and go to the Swedish 5-day. To me, that's the biggest trigger out there, to see the scope and scale of orienteering, and to see the kind of competitiveness that exists over there is a huge thing. You know, when I lived in Norway for that 1 year, got to go to a bunch of camps and stuff with the Swedes and the Norwegians, and that's as powerful as it gets. So I'm a massive proponent of anybody who really wants to take the sport seriously. I think that's that they have to spend some time. Whether or not you spend an entire year over there, I don't think that's critical, but get over there early in the spring and spend good summers, because there's so many great races between the big the Tiamila and Jukala and the Sørlandsgaloppen in Norway and the 5-day, the O-ring, and just fantastic for development and such for kids.
Jan Erik.
We can't hear you.
Mute.
All right, you can hear me
the
now. That's the second time. So I think that my dad did a really good job speaking to how much you will learn so much that orienteering is, it can be so much more competitive. than I think sometimes we see here in North America. I think, though, my favorite part about spending time over in Europe and at these international races and things have been the camaraderie and just the community that you become a part of, because we already have such a great close-knit community here in Canada. You can see the amount of people that have shown up. It's almost like it's comparable to the amount of people that you might get in your largest race here in North America. And there's this community for every single town out there. And so you have the ability to join a team and join that family there. And I did that while I was over there. And I've now gone to a lot of the big relays with them. And once you're over there, because you're a part of this wonderful orienteering community, you're able to go to so many different places with, whether it just be with like a friend of yours that might then know another friend. I've traveled over all throughout Europe while I was over there in Norway, and I was there for 1 year at a gap year high school. They have these, in Norway, they're called folk high schools, which is sort of like a cultural high school. And so I got to go there in one that had an elite sports class. There was one other orienteer that went there. We became best friends. We went to the Portugal orienteering meeting together. And yeah, I can't advocate enough of just how much of a wonderful community and how many friends that you'll make by heading over there.
Now, both Brian and Rachel spent some time in Norway as well. I want to come back to that in a future question, but Kerstin has a different scenario in that Ross hadn't lived in Scandinavia, but you did spend, I believe it was a year. Kerstin, do you want to talk about that experience? And that's a different decision about, being the first in the generations family, if you will, to make that decision.
Yeah, I mean, my story about the decision is kind of a funny one too, in that I've been really lucky to do a lot of traveling in my life and sort of have the means to do that and the parental support to be able to do that. I've met lots of people while I'm traveling who say, yeah, I'm really glad that I've come abroad, but my family didn't want me to go traveling. They thought that I should just get a job and settle down and be responsible. And my situation was kind of the opposite. I had started university here in Victoria, and I did my first year in just general studies because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And although I really enjoyed what I was studying, university is tough. And when you don't have sort of a goal in mind, it can be very difficult to keep going. And by midway through my first semester of second year, I was just like, I can't do this. Like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know why I'm here. And I called my parents in tears going, I can't do it anymore. I'm quitting university. I'm just going to move home and get a job. And my dad went, you can work when you're older. Why don't you go traveling? And I was going, I should really be responsible and stuff. He said, you know what? If you went somewhere where there's great orienteering, then that would be a really useful use of your time. It would be a great way to do something productive. And eventually, he talked some sense into me, and sure enough, instead of going home and getting a job, I went to Sweden for what was supposed to be a few months. I found a host family there who was willing to host me for a few months, and I joined the local club and started training. But I actually found out that the town that I was, Uppsala, has a university with an exchange program with my university here in Victoria. And I was actually able to go on a full 1 year university exchange. So I ended up being there for longer than I intended and actually studying there as well. So that worked out quite nicely. But it was kind of a funny start to that story. Anyways, in the end, I figured out what I wanted to do with my university, and I got some great training on the way. Like Jan Erik said, it's just the huge community there. Like in Whitehorse, we had a great community, but it was still sort of a small group. And in Uppsala, there were literally thousands of people in the local club. So you could just go orienteering basically every day. There was either scheduled trainings, or there was a training bank where you could post your own trainings and people could come and join you, or you could go and join others. And just to have that big network and just this whole social group, like all my friends were just the orienteers there. So it's a different experience. It was really, I'm grateful that I got to see that and see what that's like before coming back here.
So Kerstin mentioned Uppsala. I actually spent 4 months on sabbatical there, actually, where you started orienteering. And that's a great segue into a really good question we got from Boris Gronowski from the US. Boris spent a lot of time actually in Uppsala. Maybe he was there at the same time as you, Kerstin?
Yeah, he was.
And he asked a question, and we're going to ask everybody to weigh in on this one. How do you encourage your kids to get into orienteering without pushing so hard that they rebel and recoil from it? And I really like this question. And speaking personally, Emma, remember those days you sit in the car pretending to be sick, that you couldn't get out,
Oh,
and
yeah.
didn't want to do it, whining, you didn't want to go orienteering? You want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to deny that. I think having experienced at a young age just the orienteering community over in Sweden, coming back and having no young girls my age, no kids really to play with at these races, I was just like, well, that doesn't really sound very fun. And I definitely remember going to these races and like, yeah, I want to go orienteering, but then it was just kind of boring for a small kid. But then I think one of the most important moments was having our Adventure Running Kids program that was started in 2010. So I was about 12 years old, kind of on that cusp of getting into the abandoning the white course and getting into the yellow course. And I think having just those friends along the way that could, you know, obviously be fun to hang out with, but also give you some really important learning moments. And then I've met some of my best orienteering friends through that program. And then the links, some of those friends have become my teammates, the world and junior world champs. And then I think with that, you kind of get a good sense of who's out there and who you can be friends with. And I think that was a huge, huge moment for me, but definitely not denying the whining and the crying when I was little.
Yeah, so to answer Boris, I mean, I'm not going to deny I was really hoping Emma would be interested in orienteering. We had such a great time when she was in Uppsala. And it just sort of was great that we introduced ARC. And that program was modeled after jackrabbits. And I remember at a Orienteering Canada conference once, Brian, you talking about jackrabbits, about being a program that isn't necessarily about developing skiers, it's more about developing kids. So maybe you two, the Mays, can talk about, the idea of getting into orienteering, but also maybe with the aspect you're both quite active in cross-country skiing.
Yeah, so with respect to the ski program, I mean, we're involved in a club here, and we coach, Abby and I coach skiing, and Rachel and Trond have been involved in the ski program. And certainly our program, our ski club, views our athletes very holistically, and we try and provide opportunities in a wide variety of activities. So not only do we do ski training, but we also do orienteering training, we do paddling and many other things. So I think I've always, as a coach, tried to include orienteering for as many people as we can within our ski program. In terms of coaching or, trying to get our kids involved, I guess I'm really successful because Rachel's followed in my footsteps. But I guess if you talk to my son, you would find that maybe things aren't quite so rosy. So I'm 50-50. Obviously, when kids are younger, you sort of don't always give them a choice as to what the activities are, but as they get older, they get to choose more and more. And I'm quite happy that Rachel's chosen to keep on orienteering, and Tron's doing good stuff too, but not orienteering so much. So.
Yeah, I think for me, I don't know if there was something specific that made me want to keep coming back. Like I said earlier, I would have those moments where you really don't like it, but normally I'd come back and would be happy to go and hang out and go orienteering. So I'm not really sure what the difference was there between me and my brother, but given that I remember him beating me sometimes on when we were both doing the same course, it's not like I was way better at it than him. So I'm not sure if it's just something random.
When we started the ARC program, we were really looking at where the junior programs were the strongest in Canada, and that was Calgary and Yukon. So I'm really curious to hear the Burnett's side of this question from Boris.
Well, I guess after a few years of being in Whitehorse, I moved up there in '89. And, you know, there a lot of people sort of associated me with orienteering in the Yukon, which wasn't really correct because Yuri Pieprey had moved up before I did, and Athan Jones had moved up, and Swat Tuzlak from Calgary. And so there was a good, strong group there already. But I had done some coaching down in BC before I moved up, and so it was just a natural thing to get going and start up there because I really enjoy introducing orienteering to kids. And to me, it's always been not just about the orienteering, but about the friendships made and a way of introducing kids to, you know, the travel and the concept of orienteering as a sport for life. On a bit of a side tangent, I was reminded from one of the other comments earlier, you know, the sport for life and the camaraderie. And this February, I was down in Tucson for the Southwest Spring Week, and I had recognized one of the names of one of the participants. It was a Norwegian guy, and when we introduced ourselves to each other, he reminded me that he and I had been on the same makeup relay team in 1982 in Manitoba, and Ingvar Bratton is his name. And so we reconnected after that long period of time. And, you know, now we're communicating and he's inviting me to visit him in Norway again. So, you know, that's a classic example of the camaraderie and the friendships you make. And that's part of what I wanted to introduce to kids. And with Kerstin specifically, I mean, she'll give you her side, I guess, but I think I was always pretty careful to downplay the competitive side of it and just make it a fun event about being in nature and the travel involved and everything else. And I think we were kind of lucky in Whitehorse just because the races and the training locations are all fairly close. So there wasn't heavy travel involved, you know, just to go for a training run or something. And I think the way we did it, I don't think it interfered that much with Kerstin's other interests because she was also doing dance and high school sports and whatnot. So it was never interfering. And I think it's critical, especially with young kids, to not try to force the competitive side of it. But yeah, I guess Kerstin could tell you if I was successful in that way.
That's actually exactly the point that I wanted to make. Was I guess I don't know if I realized it at the time, but in hindsight, I do really appreciate the fact that I think you focused on opportunity and providing the opportunity to go out, but without having the pressure of, wanting me to perform well or focusing on results. And I think, in hindsight, it could have been very emotionally difficult for me if I had been under pressure and if I had been stressed out about orienteering. Whereas instead it was just, it was something fun that I looked forward to. And I know when I was little, orienteering for me meant picking berries. I'd basically go out with the map, and then as soon as I found a great cranberry patch, I'd just sit down and pick berries until I felt like going home. And it wasn't until later that I actually started competing. And I think the thing that got me to be more competitive was not pressure from my parents, but it was having my peers around me, the other juniors, that I was growing up with, and competing against them, and we were all sort of at the same level. So it became fun to see, okay, who's ahead today, and each day somebody different is winning and somebody different is doing better on certain controls or at certain aspects. And I think having my peers to compare myself to and to compete together in sort of a friendly, competitive way what got the competition part going.
Okay, in the Naess family, I mean, you've got the longest orienteering involved in your family, coming from Norway. So I'm curious to hear your side of the story. I mean, Erik, I met a photo of you orienteering with Emma when you guys were really, really young. But yeah, Oivind.
So the constant theme that comes through here is friendship and the camaraderie, and I've had that at every stage of orienteering. And I was lucky as a as a kid in Nova Scotia that I had a competitive situation with Tony Wheeler. He and I orienteered locally, raced all the time. There was another couple of them that were out. And then as, you know, moved and started competing nationally against yourself and Keith Forsyth. And there was always a great group of friends that I maintained. And then, you know, same thing as I got onto the national team program, lots of great camaraderie, and I think that's ultimately the key. And I would tell you that, you know, I want to live vicariously through my boys, so I probably pushed them harder than anybody else to get them out orienteering, which I think, you know, early on was one of the reasons why Erik said, you know, he didn't really enjoy it until he got to a bigger event and saw Europe, but. For each of my boys, and I would say Erik is the only one has really gone on to do stuff. But for us to get them out to orienteering races, it was always about bringing their friends along. So it's tough in Chicago where there's not a lot of kids, but I just think the ticket to this is programs like ARC and stuff that build a kids group, and that makes all the world a difference, I think.
Yeah. And so I think the thing that got me to really commit to orienteering was seeing that friendship piece. But I think the other piece that, you know, maybe it's not for everyone was that competition aspect. And I think, you know, there are a lot of areas around North America where it's hard to get a group of kids to go and run and train with for orienteering, but a lot of that can be done with other sports and things. And so I think one of the best ways about going about having your kids enjoy orienteering and things is until they're able to have it be a really large social piece of their life, that to have it more as a background fun bit. You know, you guys go to some big races and then make sure that you're doing training with, your kids are doing training with other kids, whether it be in cross country, or before I had realized how much I loved orienteering, I did speed skating. And so I'm now pretty good at running up the hills, but, and that's what at least drove my competitive spirit. And I think that's a really big piece, and that you need to be really flexible with going about that and realize that it's okay for, you know, like Rachel, your brother, going and doing some more cross-country skiing, and then, you know, maybe later on he'll come back a little bit more to this, because it's a sport where, and really anything is, you enjoy things to the extent that you're able to have a community out of it.
Awesome. Okay, so the next question is going to be aimed at the younger generation. I got two questions. The first one is going to be for Kerstin and Erik. All right. Do you think you could race on some of the maps that your parents used to race on way back when? Kerstin.
I mean, some of the places that we race in local races are the same still. And I know for most of my life, even when I was competing at the Junior World Championships and stuff, Daddy can still beat me on some of the really detailed maps, because at some point it's not about just going fast. You just have to know your technique really well, and he's still got that. I know though, looking back through some of my dad's old map books, because he keeps all of his maps since he was my age. So I can go and look at what he was racing on back in the 80s and stuff. And I noticed there's sort of a trend towards more and more detail in map making. So the maps that we race on now will just be absolutely packed with tiny little details. One of the ones that really gets me is when you have an area that's mapped as rough open with scattered trees, and then they've plotted individual trees on top of that. Whereas the old style maps was a lot more sparse, and I actually find that easier to read. So in some ways, I think it would be kind of fun to take some of these old maps of the same places and go back and try and run on them and see, you know, is it easier or harder?
Okay, Erik, mapping style, could you do it?
So when the COCs were in the Maritimes, there was that one ski hill that we ran on. I forget what the name was, but that was
Wentworth.
It's where
Yeah.
your parents met, dude.
so it's a significant map. And I hated it. Oh man, that was, I guess it was too general for me because I think I've now grown up with the luxury of the details. And when you were running on the side of that hill and there were ferns everywhere and you're supposed to find a knoll that's basically underneath the ferns on the side of the hill, it was a style I couldn't do and still don't think I can do.
Yeah, I got a fun story from Wentworth as well. Oivind and I were doing a relocation exercise, and our coach was Ted, and he kept running and running and running. And then we said, when are you going to stop and let us know, ask us where we are? And he says, when I figure out where we are. Yeah, so I have, yeah. But anyway, yeah, your dad met your mom at Wentworth. Okay, quick questions for Emma and Rachel. Do you think you'll ever be able to pin punch better than your parents?
Absolutely not. I mean, I still struggle using SI sometimes, not even to mention emit. So I honestly, even after the years we've had with ARC and even being able to learn how to pin punch in the cold with your mitts on, it's still just horrific.
I think it could be a toss-up. I probably have had similar experience with it as a kid, pin punching or just on casual things, but I don't think my dad probably has much experience anymore, so who knows if he's got the muscle memory for it or not.
Just like riding a bike, you never forget.
I wish I could have pin punched a quarter of a second faster per control back in the 98 North Americans, Brian. I think you beat me by 6 seconds over 2 days or something like that.
Must have been the pin punch.
It must have been the pin punching. So yeah, I don't know, Rachel. He's a pretty fast pin puncher. Let's move to something a little more serious. And walk is moving into a split walk format. Forest and sprint alternating, and Brian touched on this on one of his answers earlier. This will be more for the older generation question. Maybe I'll start with Oivind. You were a top cross-country runner when you were at Dal. What do you think about sprint? Would you have enjoyed it if it was around when you were racing? And then we'll go back to Jan Erik and ask what he thinks of sprint.
I would have killed for sprint orienteering back in my day. One, I really don't like the super long distance. I think once I get to about a 10K, I'm pretty much done. So that was a little over a half hour, and so the sprint would have been fantastic. I think the middle is great as well. So yeah, I think those have been huge additions to the sport. So I was definitely more of a runner than an orienteer. So. That would have worked well.
Mute.
And Erik.
I did it again. So I think a couple of the really unique things about sprint orienteering, and something that North America has been able to capitalize on, and that I have at least, is one of them, like, when you look at a house, that it's a building, right? It's not like you're going into other terrain. And so you're able to do a lot of map reading without running in those areas. And I've been really lucky to have sprint orienteering because I've done my cross country running. I've done that track running where, the start and stops, if you're doing 800 or 400 meter races, all of a sudden that translates right to sprint orienteering. So I've been really happy to have that as a little addition.
Cool. I was wondering, Ross, what are your thoughts?
Well, I guess I'm kind of the opposite from Oivind and Jan Erik. I've always been more partial to orienteering in the forest. To me, that's what it's always been about, is navigating in natural forest environments. I came to orienteering basically through the recreational side of things rather than the athletic side of things. I mean, I was fairly active in high school. I played some school sports and ran a little bit of cross country, but it was always more about the map and the navigation and being in the forest. So I've always thought of sprint as a bit of a novelty type event, that you might do that when there was nothing else to do, you know, like a campus event or something. So I've never been a huge fan of sprint. Although I mean, I must admit, I do like what you would, well, you know, the old European town center sprints in small European towns and whatnot. And one of the most memorable sprints I did, and Charlotte and Adrian were there, was in Morocco, a small town in Morocco, when we were on a bit of a tour together, and it was crazy cool. But generally, I'm not a huge sprint fan.
Kerstin, you share Dad's perspective on that?
More or less, yeah. I mean, I think sprint is great as a concept and like a perfectly valid branch of the sport. But personally, I prefer orienteering in the forest, probably just because I'm better at it. I've never been a fast runner. That's not my strength. I do a lot better when it's highly technical and you need to sort of go slow and steady, and other people get confused. And if I'm having a good day, then I can stay on track. And that's what I like, is the mental challenge of it, and the sort of the puzzle solving aspect of orienteering. But that's just my personal opinion.
Awesome. Now we got about just over 10 minutes left. So if you have questions you want us to answer, we have a bunch of other things we're going to talk about if you don't have questions, but feel free to ask a question on chat, and Charlotte's going to be monitoring it for us. I'm going to start with a few little quick answer questions, and we'll start with the maze on this one. When were your first Canadian Orienteering Championships?
For me, first one was in 1984 in New Brunswick, so which was convenient, close to Newfoundland where I was living back then.
So I've been told that my first ones were in, was it New Brunswick or Nova Scotia? No, I can't even remember. In 2000,
New Brunswick,
when I wasn't even 1 year old. But the first orienteering champs that I ran in for the COCs were in Saskatchewan in 2007.
For me, it was in 1979 in Newfoundland. I think it's the only time I've actually been to your home province. Brian, for you?
I actually had to look this up today because I couldn't remember. And I actually had to zoom in on a race picture with a bib so I could read what it said. And apparently it was in 2006 in Orangeville in Ontario. So I didn't even remember that, but yeah.
Now, Oivind, I think was your first one in Nova Scotia. I remember you being proud.
Yeah, I was very proud. But you know what? That actually wasn't my first COCs. That's the one that I kind of hold my hat on. But we were, it was either 75. I know in Ottawa it was 76. And I remember we all had Follow Me to Nova Scotia cloth things on all the Nova Scotian team. And that was 77 was the first time the Canadian Championships were outside of Ontario and Quebec. And we had a great turnout down there. And but yeah, the one that I remember the most is certainly Wentworth. And that was the one that my dad put on. And so there's lots of nostalgia around that one.
And Erik?
Oh, I am sure that I went to some earlier on. I think the first ones that I remember was in 2013 in Hamilton. But at the time I had a pretty nice concussion. So I remember walking into the finish line and having everyone cheer me, and me, starting to do a run and then having to go back down to a walk because I wasn't actually allowed to get my blood pressure up. And so then the real one where I got to compete was in 2014.
And Ross and Kerstin?
My first one was the 1977 one in Wentworth, Nova Scotia. And I do remember seeing a bear there. That was kind of fun. But I remember basically big hills and hardwood forests, which I wasn't quite used to.
I think my first one, maybe you remember better than I do, Daddy, but I think the first one that I ran alone was in 2002 in Canmore. I think before that, I'd always had I think one of my parents or an older orienteer shadowing me. I don't remember much about it, just that it was hot and dry, and at one point I sort of missed a turnoff and got lost and was like totally freaking out until somebody stopped and said, "Oh, it's right there," and the rest was fine. And it was, I don't know, I guess it was a good experience overall after that, and I learned that, you know, maybe I just need to not freak out so much and look at the map.
All right, so we have a question here from Ann Teutsch. At what age does the child start beating the parent in the competitions? Maybe we'll start with this one.
Depends what kind of competition.
Want to elaborate on that?
I mean, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it, but if it's a technical terrain, this old guy with no knees will still beat me, but in a sprint, he stands absolutely no chance. Even if he stops at the last control, before the go control, to take a breather and race into the finish chute. That's always been one of the fun things, even within our family and also within our club, is doesn't even matter if you've even breathed after the finish line. You have to know if you beat the other person in the finish chute, which I think is one of the most important aspects of orienteering. But I think we had an interesting question that we maybe thought of asking is, has there ever been a year where both the parent and the child has won their respective age categories at the same Canadians or North Americans? And we're trying to ask that question, but I definitely think there's terrains and races that played each other's strengths. And yeah, it's a tough question, actually.
Yeah, I haven't beaten Emma in the finish line since 2009. Maze.
I would say again in the forest, I certainly am always slower than my dad in all the last trainings we've been doing. I'm not sure about a sprint, probably would be close or I could be a little faster. As for the question about winning in the same year, I remember at North Americans in 2014 in Arnprior when my dad won. We both won our categories because I remember getting a picture with the wreath that my mom had made him up on the podium after the bigger ceremony for the elites than whatever. I was probably in W16 or something.
We just lost you on Erik, so we'll go to Ross and Kerstin.
Well, I think maybe I was still beating Kerstin up till about, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, but I think I'd be hard pressed to keep up with her now.
Do you concur?
I don't know if there's a definitive moment. I think there was quite a long period of overlap where we were sort of competitive with each other. I had all my peers to compete against as well as my dad. It's good motivation. When you're out in the forest and you're getting a little tired, you just got to keep up that pace because, you know, you can't let the old man beat you.
Okay, Oivind, you on, Erik? I know you train 5 to 7 times a week now, Oivind.
Yeah, I'll let him go first.
Yeah, you know, it's so tough to tell when that happened, but it happened at a pretty young age for him. The whole finish chute thing. I mean, we've had so much fun with that. We picked that up, I think, from the Hamilton folks when we were out at the O-Ring, and you know, Magnus, he struggles out there a little bit, and he took like 3 hours out in the woods, and we saw him walking through the kind of the last 300-400 meters to get to that control, and we have a video of him coming in lightning fast. He was 3rd fastest in the O-Ring, and so that, you know, that's become a big competitive point.
Out of like 20,000 people.
But from me, I think Jan Erik was he was going faster than me probably when he was about 16, and yeah, I don't think there's any discipline I could touch him in anymore. So, but to your question, to the question of 2 wins in the COCs at the same time, I did have to look that up, and it was Calgary, and ironically, it was the sprint, as we both liked. So,
yeah. Well, I guess that answers when we won together. When I was able to pass my dad, I think once your motivation goes up in orienteering, it makes it so that you're able to think and read a map, because if you're not motivated, you're definitely not going to be reading a forest map. And so it was once that shot up, then I was able to hold up with my dad. But that's just because he's been easy on his speed.
Okay, we're looking for, we have a few more minutes, less than 5 minutes left. I think we have a question from Charlotte. Is that right? Do you want to ask that?
Yeah, hi guys. Hi guys. 3-generation orienteering families. We actually have a few here. And I have a question, I think for the Waddingtons, and actually I think your dad is on this call. So Mike, did you go through a period as a kid where you weren't loving the sport? Like, is that just kind of inevitable that there will be a bit of a rebellion, I don't like this sport phase? Or is it sounds like Kerstin, maybe you didn't really have one either. Like, is there a chance that you won't have that rebelling against your parents phase in this sport? And if so, what was the case that made the circumstance to not have that rebellion against the sport?
I mean, for me, my parents were introduced to sport in '76, and I started running by myself in '77. But then we went and lived in Norway for a year. And after coming back from Norway, where I was running in events with 40 or 50 kids in Bergen, and then cross-country skiing with them in the winter, and then coming back, and we had a large number of juniors in our club in Hamilton, but that was still only about a dozen people. I certainly wasn't enjoying it. And I remember going to a race and taking 3 hours and coming back and said, that's it, I'm never doing this again. But luckily I came third out of 3. And then I was very, very lucky in that there was a lot of orienteering in Southern Ontario with, Ted de St. Croix in Niagara, and my first coach, Ron Lowry in Hamilton, and Brian Ellis in Guelph, and seeing these people and then in these races and all the friendships. I think I just sort of got those next few years, and then we started having these training camps in the US every spring. And then, the friendships that I would make with Oivind in particular, you wanted to make sure you saw them at the next race that summer, or went to Europe and so on. So that sort of got me through it. But yeah, there was a year or two there where it wasn't as fun because there weren't as many kids.
In answer to your question, Charlotte, I don't know if I went through a rebellion phase per se, but that's partly also just my nature. I don't think I went through a rebellious phase in any aspect of my life, really. But it did just it took me a while to get into the sport. Like I said, orienteering was about berry picking for most of my younger years, and I was not all that keen on the actual orienteering and map reading part, and I didn't really want to go to trainings or anything for it. I would just come along to the events. So I guess in a way that was my phase of not being all that interested or not wanting to do it necessarily. And then I came around to it later. I think, I'm not sure if it's inevitable or not, but I guess kids want to be independent. And if it is something where the whole family is doing it, then at some point they start to feel like maybe this isn't my decision, I'm just being forced into it. And as everyone's mentioned, it's having that sense of community and friends and peers that makes it, again, your decision. And that's, something that the kid wants to do rather than something that the kid is doing because that's what we're doing as a family.
Well, Charlotte just asked a question, and I know we're gonna end now, but I know Charlotte wanted to make a plug for a really exciting event that we all found out about and we're all pretty excited about. So maybe Charlotte, you can finish us off here.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks. Yeah, that was a really fun presentation. I had a lot of fun thinking about what you might talk about and some of the stories that you might share. And I really appreciate your time this evening. And I just love getting that history from the old timers, so thank you. We are just a bit of a save the date message. We're just in the midst, you know, and it's something that came up in this presentation, talking about how important social and friendships are in this sport. And we're missing the COCs this year, and so we've decided that we're going to have a virtual COCs banquet and silent auction via Zoom. And it's going to be on Sunday evening on August 16th. So save the date. More information is going to be coming out in about a week. But we're going to do our best to kind of replicate some of that, using Zoom breakout rooms to replicate the feel of tables at the banquet. And we're just, we're trying to do is, we're going to have a menu coming out for something that you can prepare for the event. So we're doing what we can to best replicate a banquet, and we're using a cool online platform for a silent auction as well. So we hope that many of you can make it, and it'll be a good chance to catch up with your orienteering buddies that I'm sure you're all missing this year. So stay tuned. But yes, Sunday, August 16th, we're looking at 7:30 Eastern, I think is the time we're aiming for.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for
Good night.
coming.